Hi, everybody. Radio Free Mormon here. Bill Reel there. Welcome to Mormonism Live. Hi, Bill. How you doing?
Dun, dun, dun. I'm doing great, RFM. How are you?
Just very excited about tonight's show.
Should be great.
We have the distinguished Esquire at large, Kolby Reddish. He's going to be joining us on the show here in just a minute. He's in the green room. He's actually in Philadelphia right now. Condolences accepted. He is traveling, but he is such a pro that he's going to be with us anyway on the show tonight to share with us what I think is a substantive contribution to the field of Book of Mormon studies that moves the needle on this issue. And it was a great idea. It was a brilliant idea he came up with, and he's pursued it brilliantly. Hopefully his presentation will be as brilliant. Bill, do you have anything you want to tell us?
Just that Kolby is full of brilliant ideas, and this will be just another one. I think at this point, we're way beyond the hat trick. So,
yeah, he's so brilliant. Let's bring him on now and see if he's blushing. Are you blushing, Kolby?
Well, I was raised Mormon, so I'm not very comfortable with praise, but thank you, gentlemen.
You're very welcome. So don't let us down. There's no pressure at all here, okay?
Great.
When did you come up with this idea? It has to do with a textual comparison between the Book of Mormon and basically the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'll leave it general for now.
Yeah.
And to see if there were what we would expect if the Book of Mormon really were what it represents itself as being, as having a very early form of Isaiah. And wouldn't that look more like what's the Isaiahs in the Dead Sea Scrolls than it would like the Isaiah that the King James Version used, which came about 1,000 years after Christ?
Yep, that's exactly right. So where I came up with the idea was a few months ago, Colby Townsend released some research where he was looking into links between the Adam Clarke Bible commentary and the Book of Mormon, basically looking at, and so Tom Wayment basically was the first to chip away at this and look at the Adam Clarke Bible commentary in connection with the Joseph Smith translation, he and Haley Wilson Lamont. And then
once again, you were a student assistant for Thomas Wayment?
I was a research assistant for Tom. I actually just met up with him a few weeks ago when I was in Utah for a family wedding, and it was great to see him. It's been almost 15 years, I guess, since I graduated BYU and was working with him. But yeah, at the time he was looking for I loved Tom. I took all of my religion classes from BYU or at BYU from Tom because I just loved how he taught. I loved how he dealt with the evidence. Like in his New Testament course, for example, he didn't shy away from basically just outright telling you that Peter and Paul didn't really get along if you read the New Testament. And I just felt like he was really honest. And so then when Cammie and I had our first child, we were both working at the MTC at the time. He was looking for a remote research assistant / teaching assistant position. And that's when I started working for Tom for, I think, about a year and a half. But actually the last thing I was working on, like I remember him telling me about the research that he was going to then do with Haley Wilson Lamont. Because I remember him talking about it once before I left working for him. But yeah, I was reading Colby Townsend's piece on looking at the Adam Clarke Bible commentary as a potential source for the Book of Mormon. Yeah. And as I was doing that, I was actually doing that live with John DeLynn and Gerardo on Mormon Stories. As we were doing that, I was looking at the text of the Great Isaiah Scroll. So that's specifically the Dead Sea Scroll that we'll be looking at tonight. And there are other scrolls we could look at. That's the scroll known as 1Q Isaiah A.
That's what I always call it.
Yeah, that's what the kids call it. And that scroll, the Great Isaiah Scroll, for folks who don't know, predates our earliest manuscript of the Book of Isaiah by 1,000 years. And so as I was looking at Colby's research, I was sitting there thinking, hey, this actually gives us a really good opportunity to propose like a falsifiable hypothesis for the Book of Mormon story. And that's basically what our slides will examine tonight.
Right. And if it's a falsifiable hypothesis, it does come under the ambit of scientific experimentation, doesn't it? Even with literature, is that possible, do you think, Kolby?
Well, I wouldn't even necessarily say this is like a literary exercise. It's really looking more like the sources. So it's more history, I'd say. But you know, I'm not a historian. I'm not a linguist. I'm not an expert in literary stuff.
I'm a country doctor.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy who wrote a letter. No, I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy who I'm just a guy who really likes thinking about falsifiable ideas or thinking about ways to propose a hypothesis that we can actually test. So I think I've decided on the fact that my new hobby horse is going to be Book of Mormon historicity, um, you know, for obvious reasons involving no particular Mormon apologist, but
Jacob Hansen, it's like he's Victor von Frankenstein. And what has he created? He's created
yeah,
Kolby.
yeah, his randomness. So I do have to I created this I did create this Lego image based on a past Lego image that you and I used in a Light and Truth Letter episode, so people might recognize it. But after we had finished that episode, you gave me a hard time and said that the AI did not give you enough hair. So I made sure to correct that this episode.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I noticed that. I appreciate it. And I think everybody in the audience appreciates it too.
Yeah, it's more accurate for sure.
Yes. So I don't know, maybe it's what, Sean Connery, is that what you were saying? Looks a little bit like Sean Connery.
Yeah.
Bill, however, looks a bit like Waldo.
We're gonna let that ride out for how long? Are we gonna be in Halloween till New Year's?
You're never living the Waldo thing down, Bill.
Till
I've
next
already
Halloween,
decided that.
I thought it was a great costume.
Well, it was, and that's what made it great, is that you look so much like him.
At least one of us didn't have a list that night.
No.
That's true. That was a pretty wild episode, guys. But yeah, I titled the slideshow tonight "The Book of Mormon's Other Isaiah Problem" because there are, and on one of the early slides, we'll talk about how there are a lot of problems with the Book of Mormon's inclusion of Isaiah. This is, as far as I know, I found some work from some apologists. We'll talk about that in the course of the presentation, but I don't really know anyone else who's looked at this the same way I have. And RFM, I feel like you would know if someone had. So
I'm sorry. Yes. I was looking up who it is that I think I look like, and I think I look like James Brolin. That was the name I couldn't remember before the show. I just looked up Marcus Welby, MD.
You do look like James Brolin, actually.
I know. It's uncanny. Now, you were asking a question that had something to do with the subject. I apologize.
Well, I titled this "The Book of Mormon's Other Isaiah Problem." I almost called it "The Book of Mormon's Deutero Isaiah Problem," but that would have been confusing because, Deutero just means second, and people might get confused if we use that for the actual problem posed by Deutero Isaiah instead of it being a second Isaiah problem. But this is actually a completely separate issue from Deutero Isaiah. What I was asking you was...
Yes, it is, and I intentionally did not name the show that. Because Isaiah, anything with Isaiah in it, death. Nobody's going to watch.
What I was trying to ask you was, you have more experience with other critical arguments and other apologetic arguments. As far as I know, I don't know anyone else has looked at this from the same lens. Do you know if anyone has before?
I do not have an encyclopedic, comprehensive knowledge of all the literature, especially as of now. But no, not to my knowledge. And you did a search for it too. I had a recollection that there had been an apologetic attempt, and I remembered the actual researcher, and you were able to find it, and we'll look at that. But no, I'm not aware of anybody else trying what it is that you have tried.
Okay, great.
Have you said what it is you tried yet?
Not yet. First, let me do my disclaimer.
Yes.
Which is, anytime we talk about Book of Mormon historicity, very often we'll get comments about people who say, but the Book of Mormon is so meaningful to me, or it's so valuable, or it's given me guidance in my life. It's so useful to my life. It has this rich, depth and complexity. I don't care about any of those things when we're talking about historicity. So when we're talking about historicity, I'm really only talking about the question of historicity. And the reason is because you can find meaning, value, utility, depth, complexity in the works of Tolkien or of any other number of fictional authors. And so we're really talking about looking at the Book of Mormon's historical claims and seeking to test those claims and see if we actually can. And so I'm also not going to talk about the Deutero Isaiah problem. I felt like if I tried to touch on that, it would just open things up way too much. Or talk about Colby Townsend's work, aside from just mentioning that it basically inspired this. He's a far better Colby than I. But the basic premise of this is, if the Book of Mormon were historical, we would expect to see certain pieces of evidence. And so tonight's presentation is basically an attempt to falsify the Book of Mormon by analyzing whether its claims about its world are likely historically true.
Can you give us a brief aside about your use of the word falsify in that sentence? because it doesn't mean you're trying to prove it false, right? It just means this is a point at which we can see whether it passes. There's a test that we can construct to see whether it passes.
Yeah, exactly. It really is summed up in that first sentence. If the Book of Mormon were historical, we would accept to see certain pieces of evidence based on what it is claiming. And so over here on the right-hand side of the slide, it's often said that absence of evidence is not conclusive evidence of absence. And that's true, right? That would be fallacious thinking. But where evidence is expected, the absence of evidence can be absolutely very strong evidence.
Which is actually an exception to the hearsay rule. If you in business records, not only something that's kept there customarily, but if there's something that's kept there customarily and it's not there and it's relevant, yeah, you can get that admitted.
Yep, absolutely. And this really, where I kind of came up with the idea, aside from Kolby's piece, is in our Light and Truth Letter Response series, RFM. I did a very similar argument based upon the information density of Reformed, Egyptian, and Hebrew in our episode called "Do Linguistics Prove the Book of Mormon True?"
Yes, so another brilliant episode.
Yeah, I kind of view this as a second argument against Book of Mormon historicity. We could say that these are the types of things someone would offer in like a formal structured debate about Book of Mormon historicity, but
I don't even believe there is such a thing anymore. Are there any more structured debate about Book of Mormon historicity? I feel like it's on the endangered species list.
I don't think it's likely to happen. That actually reminds me. You want to tell my quick story from this morning?
Oh yeah, I made up some slides. You want me to get the slides up?
Sure.
Of both of those things that you sent me that I wouldn't have shown without your permission?
Sure. I don't remember exactly which ones you're showing, but that's fine. Let's do it.
Okay. So go ahead and just start talking and let me, I'll take Marcus Welby off the other screen and let me see if I can find these. Go ahead. You may start your story. Please do.
About the missionary this morning.
Oh, the missionary. Yes. Go ahead and tell the missionary story.
Yeah. So this morning, I'm flying out to Philadelphia for a work conference. And the first leg of my journey was from Boise to Salt Lake. And I was so happy when I showed up and there were a whole cadre of missionaries flying out to the missionary training center that morning. And I know that missions can be really hard. And I know that a lot of people in the post-Mormon space have very mixed feelings towards the church. I do too. But I definitely try not to take it out on missionaries. Like they're just young kids who really don't know what they're doing. And so I walked over to the missionaries and started talking to them, telling them that I had served a mission in Arizona, that I'd previously taught at the MTC. And I was really just trying to be very, very nice to them. And then as we boarded the plane, so I'm sitting there texting with RFM saying, how funny that I'm having an episode released with Mormon Stories that we filmed a few weeks ago today, doing Mormonism Live tonight. And I'm sitting there talking to these missionaries, And as we go to get on the plane, I was so happy. I'm sitting next to one of them. And I'm texting RFM saying, this is going to be so fun. I'm going to strike up a conversation with him. And he was so nervous. This Elder Rich was his name, and he was headed to South Carolina. And he was so nervous that I leaned over to him at one point during the flight, and I said, because the Boise to Salt Lake flight is only like 50 minutes. It's really quick. I said, hey, Elder, I used to teach at the MTC. Would you like to practice like just like an overview of what the Book of Mormon is, or kind of like a pitch of the first lesson with someone who's familiar with it? Didn't say anything about being an Exmo. I wasn't going to get into that at all. I was really just trying to like build him up because I know that transition from real world to MTC is really, really rough. I saw so many kids really struggle with it when I taught at the MTC. And he like literally froze. Like I broke his brain, I think. And I just looked, because he just looked at me for like probably 15 seconds. And I said, you know that no is an acceptable answer, right? You can tell me that you don't want to do that. And he said, okay, yeah, I'll think about it. And then we didn't speak the rest of the flight. But so my point being, Jacob Hansen isn't the only one who doesn't want to talk about the Book of Mormon.
Right. You are obviously quite an intimidating persona. You project confidence.
You told me that it was the horns that probably drew him away.
I thought maybe it was the horns, but it could be. Some people get put off by your horns. Me, I find them attractive.
Thanks.
You bet. So that's a great story, and I'm so glad you told it. I have to say, something occurs to me now that we are texting while you are next to this missionary, this newbie missionary, and some people might think that I would be giving you directions, unsolicited advice on what you should do to this missionary to really screw with him, right?
Yeah, but you
I
didn't.
would think some people might think that about me. Can you believe it? Because I actually did text you something
Mhm.
of a directional nature. Can you disclose what it was to
I
the
think you
audience?
said you either said be nice or play nice.
I said, be nice. I might have said play nice, actually, now that you say that. But the idea was be nice, okay? Be nice. And I knew he would be. Well, I was pretty sure he would be. If I was sure he would have been, I wouldn't have had to say play nice. But that's a great story. But the other story had to do with some communications with a guy named Kent.
Oh, you want to tell that story? Okay.
Is that okay?
I guess. Sure.
No,
I
no,
don't care.
hey, it is acceptable for you to say no. I tell you what, we'll save it to the end right now. I don't want to lose the thread
Okay.
of
Yeah,
this
let's
very
keep going
important
on.
thing.
Let's keep going on Isaiah.
Okay. All right. So that was it, right? You're done with the slide?
This slide, yes.
Okay. The brass
Okay.
plate.
So for people who grew up Mormon and know the kind of overarching narrative of the Book of Mormon, this is going to feel repetitive, but I promise there's a method to this madness. It's because I'm trying to cut off at the pass any like apologetic arguments to get around this and to make this looser than it is. Okay. So as we talked about, we're going to look at the Book of Mormon's capture of certain chapters in Isaiah, and we're going to compare those to the Great Isaiah Scroll, which was discovered in 1947 in Qumran as part of the Dead Sea Scrolls collection, right? And the premise of this episode is taking the Book of Mormon's narrative at face value and then saying, if this were historically true, what would we expect to see? What would we expect to find? So, do you want to read this kind of statement about what the brass plates are from the Guide to the Scriptures, RFM, and then add any additional detail you feel is necessary?
Sure thing. This is from the LDS publication within the Standard Verse called Guide to the
Correct.
Scriptures. All right. Quote, a record of the Jews from the beginning to 600 BC. This is the brass plates, folks, containing many writings of the prophets. This record was kept by Laban, one of the Jewish elders in Jerusalem. While Lehi and his family were in the wilderness, Lehi sent his sons back to Jerusalem to obtain this record. Citations omitted.
Yes. And then I have one of the citations on the next slide. If you'll go forward, I actually do want to read them because I think they're, at least this part here is important. So in 1 Nephi 5 is where it's recorded. I've observed this before, but I'll just do it as a slight aside. It's funny to me that Laman and Lemuel complain about being sent back to Jerusalem to get the brass plates, but when Nephi and Laman and Lemuel are sent back to get Ishmael and his family that have the wives, there is no murmuring and complaining. That's just a slight aside. But okay, so First Nephi 5. Thanks for that, Bill. First
I'm
Nephi
trying to
5
think of
verses.
the General Authority 70 who said that back in the 70s or something.
Oh, someone else has made that joke. That's fantastic. I probably stole it without even knowing.
No, no, great
Okay,
minds work alike. You could have been a leader in the LDS Church, Kolby, if you just kept your nose clean.
I mean, I'm a lawyer. I could have been a contender.
You could have been somebody.
Some things never change.
I'm sorry,
So
you were saying?
First Nephi 5 is where we've got this part of the story where it talks about the brass plates. So Nephi is recording this, and he says, and after they had given thanks unto the God of Israel, my father Lehi took the records which were engraven upon the plates of brass, and he did search them from the beginning. And he beheld that they did contain the 5 books of Moses, which gave an account of the creation of the world, and also of Adam and Eve, who were our first parents, and also the prophecies of the holy prophets from the beginning, even down to the commencement of the reign of Zedekiah, and also many prophecies which have been spoken of by the mouth of Jeremiah. So the reason that this is important is because it very clearly tells us what is in the brass plates. It tells us that it starts with the book of Genesis, the first of the 5 books of Moses, and then it continues down to what it says, many of the prophecies which have been spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah. Jeremiah was the prophet that was right after Isaiah. So that's the book of the Bible, of the Old Testament, that comes right after Isaiah. So the idea is, and I think this really, right at the beginning, shows how ridiculous this idea is, because records were not kept this way. It's operating from this idea that there was a proto Bible kept of all these books being collected at the same time, which isn't the way that it works as far as we understand today.
And in a codex format.
And in a codex format, which I think, great segue, is our next slide.
Here we go.
Bill, you want to read this one? You're on mute.
And this is from the actual Bible dictionary. This is what makes this so delish, is
Mm-hmm.
that the Mormons themselves put this in your LDS version of the scriptures in the Bible dictionary.
Mm-hmm.
Once
All
again,
right.
under C for codex.
So Bible Dictionary Codex, a manuscript volume of ancient biblical text. A codex from a manuscript is somewhat
Form.
like,
Sorry, Bill, that's a codex form of manuscript.
codex form of manuscript, sorry, is somewhat like our present book style, with the pages piled on one another and joined at one side, generally with a stitching. This is contrasted to a scroll in which the sheets are joined side by side in a series, making one long and continuous piece that is then rolled from one or both ends. The codex is much easier to use than is a long scroll. The general conclusion among scholars is that the Hebrews did not use codices until the 2nd or 3rd century AD. Thus, Old Testament documents are scrolls.
Can you believe? Sorry, I'm interrupting right now. It's right after the bolded part. Can you believe they put that the LDS church that believes in the Book of Mormon and the gold plates and the brass plates that are talked about in the Book of Mormon from 600 freaking BC, more than 600, it's actually closer to 800 or 900 years earlier, that it's talking about a codex. And then it lets the cat out of the bag, right in its Bible dictionary under codex, that general conclusion among scholars is Book of Mormon is making it up because they didn't use codices until the 2nd or 3rd century AD.
Yep. I couldn't say it any better myself. This
You
is a
found this.
technology. Yeah. I've cited this a number of different times. I don't know in any presentation, but because when you really know a little bit about history enough to start looking, you start understanding that there were certain technologies that needed to exist for the narrative of the Book of Mormon to be historical. And many of those technologies did not exist, including the very idea of a collection of plates, whether you're talking about the brass plates or the plates compiled by Nephi. Both of those are complete anachronisms according to the LDS Church itself. It's right here in the Bible dictionary. Now, do they come out and tell you the import of this? No, they don't. But it was surprising to me to find this so explicit in the Bible dictionary.
Thus, Old Testament documents are scrolls, with one exception in the Book of Mormon with a guy named Laban.
It is funny that they obviously noticed the discrepancy as well, so they include this last little section. Although many New Testament documents are codices, the gold plates from the Book of Mormon were the plates from which the Book of Mormon was translated were in codex form, joined with 3 rings on one side. So they're acknowledging it doesn't fit. One of these things is not like the other. It's like Sesame Street, and it's up to you to figure it out. But they're going to figure out some way to justify it. So
it's amazing they give the information and then they do draw the conclusion, right? The Book of Mormon was translated. Those plates were in codex form. It doesn't even try and say, but that's different. Wow.
Yeah, that's correct.
Incredible.
Yeah, and this is why when we have apologists who get excited about every little scrap of metal that's got engraving on it in the Near East, like happened last year, where there was that find that was kind of pseudo archaeology as far as I understand it, as I followed up on that. They're not really doing a like comparison, because it's not finding a plate with some type of decorative engraving on it, which is what almost all of those finds are. It's finding a codice or finding a codex that has information on it. And they have not found that from this time period that it would have been needed ever. And so our first anachronism that we're dealing with tonight, as far as the Book of Mormon, is the Book of Mormon itself, as well as the brass plates.
Can I say something here, which is that apologists, at least back in the day when I joined the church, and I think it's still trumpeted out there once in a while, I forget what the name of it is, but it starts with a D, but it's what you're saying. It's this collection of writings on brass or gold plates. Again, I forget what the name of it is. Anyway, like I said,
Plates of Darius, probably something like that. Yeah.
What you're pointing out, this is apples and oranges. This is not, because every believer out there goes, wait a minute. I know that there have been writings all through the ages that have been written on metal that have, it's just not the same thing. Yeah.
Nope. And
No,
when we're
no, it's
talking
not at
about,
all. By the way, if I'm a lawyer and this is a case that I'm trying in court and I get the other side's expert witness to admit what is on this slide, when he gets down to one side period at the end, I stop and I say, I have no further questions.
yeah,
It's not going to get any
absolutely.
better than that.
hmm No, you're absolutely right, because a technology that's absolutely required for this narrative to be true didn't exist at the time, according to their own expert witness.
Yeah, and
hmm
as you know, if you keep asking the question to the witness to give them the idea and let them clue into the fact of what they said means, then they'll start changing it on you.
hmm
Now, you save that for argument.
hmm Exactly.
Okay, so the next slide here.
The next one goes back to the brass plates. So this is level setting for explaining why, or explaining Nephi's reasoning, according to Nephi, supposedly, for why he's including these passages from Isaiah. So for people who've read the Book of Mormon all the way through, um, everybody knows that you kind of get hooked or maybe a little bored by First Nephi, and then you get into Second Nephi, and so many people hit a wall because there's just these huge passages of Isaiah, like back to back to back. And especially for like when I was a missionary in Arizona and teaching investigators, this whole part of the Book of Mormon is really, really difficult for people to wade through, because if you want to understand like the complexity and the symbolism of Isaiah, it really isn't written. I know the Book of Mormon says over and over again, and the church says over and over again, the Book of Mormon's written for our day, but the stuff in Isaiah is not written for people in our day. It was written for people in that pre and post, depending on how you view, Deutero and Trito Isaiah. It was written for people right before the Jewish exile or right after the Jewish exile. And that's why a lot of the symbolism doesn't make any sense when we look at it from our lens today. Setting all that aside, I wanted to provide like direct textual evidence from the Book of Mormon where Nephi is talking about using these words. And the reason I'm doing this is to cut off this apologetic argument that, well, it was kind of like a looser conceptual translation. Nephi was copying whatever. No, he makes it really clear here in 2nd Nephi 11:2. And now I, Nephi, write more of the words of Isaiah, for my soul delighteth in his words. For I will liken his words unto my people, and I will send them forth unto all my children, for he verily saw my Redeemer, even as I have seen him. This links back to the original reason they were told to go get the brass plates in the first place. Let's not forget, Nephi literally was told by the Spirit to murder someone to obtain these plates. And the reason that they were so important is because without them, the Spirit told Nephi, his people would dwindle and perish into unbelief, which they do anyways. But let's just set that aside for a moment and
It just
say
took longer.
these words were supposedly so important that Nephi needed them to be able to copy them down, compare them to his people, and send them forth among his people. So, what I'm trying to do here is show very clearly, according to the text's own narrative, Nephi is directly copying these words. This isn't some midrash that Nephi is doing. This isn't some loose translation, conceptual translation. He says that he's copying the words of Isaiah.
But that statement itself, that description itself is conceptually loose. Checkmate.
Well, if you're willing to believe that.
Sorry, I thought that was a good one. I'm channeling my inner apologist.
So this is where we get a little bit closer to me explaining the methodology of what I did. I wanted to set that frame and then say, here is a breakdown of all the chapters of Isaiah in the Book of Mormon which are directly quoted. So there are also places where there's like paraphrasing or citations or references and allusions. I'm pulling this right from the work of Jack Welch, who provided this table of here are the direct quotations that basically in this narrative, according to the last slide we just looked at, that Nephi is copying into his set of plates from the brass plates.
It looks like around 23 entries.
I believe that's probably right. I actually
I was
didn't
just trying to
count
count
them
them here.
all up. It's
Okay.
basically it's Isaiah 2, starts at Isaiah 2, goes to Isaiah 14, and then it picks back up in the 40s, 48, then to 53, 54.
Yes, unfortunately, quoting not only from Isaiah, but also from
Deutero
Isaiah. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, so let me go to the next one. But there's another Isaiah scroll out there lurking in the waters.
There is.
It's the
And we're
great
going to
Isaiah scroll.
That's right. We're going to need a bigger scroll. So, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, for people who aren't familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, so all of the information I pulled from this slide, including the image, comes from the digital Dead Sea Scrolls webpage at the Israel Museum at Jerusalem webpage. So, this is from the actual museum that holds these records today. So, the Dead Sea Scrolls were basically a game changing discovery in 1947 in Qumran. The Great Isaiah Scroll is one of those original 7 Dead Sea Scrolls that was discovered in the first cave. So, when scholars, if you're ever reading this type of like biblical scholarship and you see that 1Q Isaiah A, what that's saying is the first cave in Qumran, it's an Isaiah manuscript, and it's basically the earliest one, which is why they denoted it A. So in that same cave, there's a 1Q Isaiah B, for example.
Oh, the superscript. I see it now.
Yes. Yep.
Of the
So
A.
1Q Isaiah A is basically the scholarly name for the Great Isaiah Scroll. Throughout the rest of the presentation, I'll just call it the Great Isaiah Scroll. It is the largest scroll. It's 24 feet long.
I put that in
best. There. Oh, did you?
You had
okay,
734 centimeters, and I said, I got no idea.
You converted it over. Yeah.
24
That's
feet
right.
sounds a lot more impressive to me.
That's so true. Americans have no conception for how long a centimeter is. That's the truth. I would never have been able to tell you that's 25 feet.
The only industry to successfully convert over to the metric system was famously the drug industry. And I'm not talking about the legal ones.
Well, I'm glad to show I have very little experience with that industry then.
I stole that from George Carlin. I admit it.
Okay. So the Great Isaiah Scroll is the largest of all of these scrolls and one of the best preserved biblical scrolls that we have. And it's very interesting because it's basically an almost entirely complete version of Isaiah. It's got 54 columns and contains all of the 66 chapters of Isaiah. And it was compiled around, basically, like scholars differ on this, between 150, 100 BC. So I just put it about circa 125. And because it is one of the oldest of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and here's the very important part for the Book of Mormon, it backs up our understanding of the earliest version of Isaiah. It's the earliest version of Isaiah we've ever seen by 1,000 years. And that's one of the reasons that it's so important and gives us an opportunity to basically make a falsifiable prediction about the Book of Mormon.
Mm-hmm. In Hebrew, certainly. Yes.
Right. And I think if you'll go forward one more scroll, we've got a little bit more information on this. So at the same time, the 2,000-year-old scroll contains variant alternative spellings, scribal errors, corrections, and most fundamentally, many variant readings. Strictly speaking, the number of variants is well over 2,600, ranging from a single letter, sometimes to one or more words, to complete variant verse or verses. I emphasize that because that will come back.
Yeah, and can I state what I think may be obvious is that the comparison is being made between the Great Isaiah Scroll and the Masoretic Scroll, or the Masoretic text, excuse me.
Yep.
Okay, that's the two things being compared for all these variants.
Exactly. And I think I've got it here in white that will help drive this home. Because the Great Isaiah Scroll predates the Masoretic text version, which, and RFM will talk about this in just a second, but the Masoretic text was the earliest before this Great Isaiah Scroll version of Isaiah that we had access to. Part of it informs most of it actually informs the King James Version translation, but not all of it. And that'll become important in a few of the examples we look at. But because the Great Isaiah Scroll predates the Masoretic text version that goes into the Leningrad Codex by about 1,000 years, it gives us a very rare and interesting example to make a falsifiable prediction on the point of Book of Mormon historicity. And here's the way I want people to think about this. Okay. If the Book of Mormon's brass plate story were true, we would expect to see the Book of Mormon's Isaiah verses agree more when we're talking about these textual variants, spelling variants, the missing verses or verses. We would expect for the brass plates version to more closely match the Great Isaiah Scroll version than we would this version from 1,000 years later, or what ultimately makes it into the King James Version when the two disagree.
Yes, and you got a great chart on that too. I don't know if it's coming up next, but let's see. It's not quite yet. Oh, I'm talking a little. Okay, so the Masoretic text.
I think Bill had something he wanted to say real quick.
I'm sorry, Bill.
Just from a rational point of view, that makes perfect sense. Further back we go, we should have a document that resembles the Book of Mormon more closely than a modern version of the scriptures. But Mormonism makes it worse because you have, for instance, the KJV being restored to its perfect form. You have the Book of Mormon, which it's not just an ancient document being found in a modern moment. It's God giving the translation, and he's giving the original Isaiah. So it's sort of in the mouth of two or three witnesses. It should be accurate for two reasons, not just one. More accurate. The older Isaiah compared to the Book of Mormon should be more accurate than a modern KJV version of the Bible in comparison with the Book of Mormon for multiple reasons.
Yeah. So you got the original Isaiah around 721, 740, whatever it is. It's the early 8th century BCE. So that's where you start with the original Isaiah. I know there's Deutero Isaiah, which may come around, 600, and then another one 70 years later or so. But just basically, okay, hang in there with me. It's written, the Isaiah. Isaiah lives let's just say 720, okay? And so it gets written down then. And the question is, that's the original. That's the most closely resembling the original because it is the freaking original. But copies get made, okay? And over time, errors get brought into the text, sometimes intentionally, usually unintentionally. But and then the further removed you are from the original text, the more likely it is that errors are going to be compounded and added. Okay, they're going to have more errors in them. It's going to be less like the original text. So here's the deal. According to the Book of Mormon, the original of Isaiah gets written down, these chapters at least, in the Book of Mormon on those gold plates from the brass plates, right?
Right.
It had to be before 600 BC. So you got like 100 years there. That's really close to the original.
Right.
720. You're so close to the original, you're going to have a really, really good Isaiah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what the Book of Mormon says. But then time goes by, and 600 years later, actually only 500 years later, after 600 BC, so 100 BCE, you have these people, these Jewish people out at Qumran, and they like the Bible too, and they like Isaiah, and they write down this huge Isaiah scroll that they copy. They're copying it from their sources. That's very, very early.
Mm-hmm.
That's especially compared to the fact that you go another 1100 years and you get up to 1000 AD or CE, as we call it nowadays. Over 1,000 years later, you have a group of Jewish people who are called the Masoretes or Masoretes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they put together this Bible. They want to keep it together. The Hebrew Old Testament, here it's 24 books, okay, at least in theirs. And it is a very, very important authoritative source, so much so that the King James translator, 600 years later, actually 500 years later, but they use as a basis for their Old Testament the Masoretic text.
Exactly.
Because they hadn't found the great Isaiah scroll and the Dead Sea Scrolls. But in 1947, when they discovered this, okay, our Hebrew Old Testament, our Hebrew Isaiah, it went back 1,000 years. All of a sudden, we had a copy of Isaiah that was 1,000 years earlier. And it was much closer, actually, to the original Isaiah than it was even to the Masoretic text itself, which is astonishing when you think about it.
Right. Yeah,
So
it's an
having said all of
incredible
that, it's a
discovery.
brilliant idea that you have. It would be absolutely reasonable to expect that if the Book of Mormon is what it claims it is, then the Isaiah in the Book of Mormon would more closely resemble the Masoretic text, not the Masoretic text, but the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Right.
which is only 500 years later, as opposed to the Masoretic text, which is 15 to 1600 years later.
You have
Okay.
a third. You
Is
have
that
a
clear
third,
enough now? What is it, Bill?
You have a third issue too.
Yeah.
Mormonism has a narrative that priest and other people corrupted the text. So the King James Bible that we have is a corrupted text. That Isaiah has been corrupted by corrupt priests and other people who have taken things out and added things in. When we go back to an older version of Isaiah, we should find something that hasn't been corrupted as much. And hence it should match what comes out in the Book of Mormon. It should match what adaptations Joseph Smith made in the Joseph Smith translation. And anyway, I guess that's not what we're going to find.
It's the perfect opportunity for the Book of Mormon to prove itself.
It is.
Mhm. It is, and that's why it was so compelling to me to do this analysis. This took a lot of time, and because I was looking at every single verse, and the reason I did it is because there aren't very many opportunities like this where a discovery gives us the opportunity to make a falsifiable hypothesis and say, I'm going to take this narrative at face value. What would we expect to see? As you both have just talked about, it's very reasonable to conclude, especially when we look at some of the specific examples that I know you both have already seen. It's very reasonable to conclude, just based on the way time works, that the Book of Mormon's version of these Isaiah verses should more closely track with the Great Isaiah Scroll version.
Right. Very good. All right. So I've already covered this and what I've talked about. Okay. So let's go to this. This is the chart you drew up. By the way, I moved things just a little bit. I thought it made things clearer, but
Oh, that's
um,
totally fine.
okay.
I definitely wanted to do this because I know if you haven't spent a lot of time doing like this biblical history, biblical criticism, like where does the Bible actually come from, it can be a little confusing. So I think you kind of explained this, RFM, but I want to go through it one more time because I think it's really important. So
Mm,
this is our timeline from Isaiah's ministry, and I even pulled the famous picture of him writing on the scroll. We've got the Isaiah's ministry on the left-hand side, ending with the Book of Mormon's publication and translation in 1829. So our first entry here, we've got Isaiah's ministry begins, like you said, our friend. This is where Isaiah is supposedly, if we're accepting the narrative at face value, writing down all of his visions and revelations. It's then 140 years later, where in 600 BC, about 600 BC, Lehi and Nephi are leaving Jerusalem with these brass plates that supposedly have this copy of Isaiah from just 140 years earlier. It's then in 125 BC that the great Isaiah scroll is created, that we've talked about, this 1Q Isaiah A scroll that was found in Qumran. And you can see the huge gap there, which is the Leningrad Codex, this Masoretic text that we've talked about, but then makes it mostly into the King James translation of the Old Testament in 1611. So in white is where I've got the question, which would we most expect the brass plates to resemble? And the clear answer is the Great Isaiah Scroll, because of, you can see the distance in the red arrows on the screen. The idea is, and I'm not saying it should be a perfect match. That would be a straw man of what I'm saying. The idea is when we see these variants between the Great Isaiah Scroll and this later Masoretic text version, we should see the Book of Mormon be vindicated by the brass plates supposedly having this earlier version of Isaiah.
At the very least, it should match up in some places. We should expect, again, maybe some things yes, maybe some things no. I think that would be acceptable. We should find at least some correlation between the modern Book of Mormon or the modern KJV translation and what this ancient documentation of Isaiah's writings says. To have none would be a big deal.
You should. Yeah, you should. So before we get into the methodology and some of the examples, I want to give people the conclusion, because then they're going to get the examples.
right.
The Book of Mormon's Isaiah passages almost always align word for word with the King James Version or the Masoretic text tradition. Let me take 1 second to say, for folks who aren't super interested in biblical history, biblical criticism, the King James Version is a terrible translation. Because it doesn't incorporate any of these things that we've learned from the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, because the Great Isaiah Scroll is just one of many different Dead Sea Scrolls that have kind of changed our understanding of many of these books. Modern Bibles do not, modern Bibles incorporate the stuff that we've learned because of the Great Isaiah Scroll, or will tell you, the long ending of Mark, that it's probably not legitimate, or John 8, the woman taken in adultery, that story was likely a later scribal addition. But the King James Version, because of, it's a good translation for what it was trying to do in 1611, but it isn't the most up-to-date, it isn't the most accurate. So the Isaiah passages in the Book of Mormon align almost word for word with the King James Version or the Masoretic text tradition, and this is the kicker, including late medieval additions, translation quirks, and Latin loanwords. For those who don't know, Latin would not have existed in 600 BC, so that's a huge problem. While they show no substantive agreement with any unique reading from the Great Isaiah Scroll, we will go through 5 that John Tvetnes claimed, and I think when you see them, listeners, you're going to laugh just as much as I did when I was going through them. What this demonstrates to me is that the Book of Mormon reflects the 17th century English Bible, not a pre-exilic Hebrew source, contradicting the Book of Mormon's claim to preserve Isaiah as it existed around 600 BC. Before we talk methodology, RFM or Bill, do you have anything you want to add here about the conclusions?
Just about the apologists very quickly. You see, apologists recognize the potential for evidentiary value of a comparison between Book of Mormon Isaiah and the Dead Sea Scrolls version of Isaiah. And I'm just saying that because they're not even arguing that. That is granted. And the only question is, where does it fall? You get to look at the evidence yourself and make your own decision.
Mm-hmm. I also just want to comment on this adorable claymation Nephi disappearing. The idea being, when you've got an anachronism like this, it's like Back to the Future. That's the best way I've helped people understand it, right? When Marty's picture and his siblings start disappearing. When
That's
you've got
intentional.
Yeah. I intentionally tried to get that right. It took effort, actually.
I bet it did. I just thought maybe some sand got involved.
And just a little note. I just want to make sure the audience is clear. The Latin language originated, I think, 2,500 years ago. It says in the region of Latium near the Tiber River. What you're pointing to is that Isaiah would have had zero access to the Latin language.
Exactly.
Were completely different. And while Latin does seem to originate about the same time, it would have been impossible for Isaiah to have had any awareness of the Latin language and to utilize it.
Exactly. And we don't find those Latin loanwords in the Great Isaiah Scroll for a reason.
Correct.
So let's talk about methodology and how I did the comparisons. So what I did is I compared each chapter of Isaiah that's quoted in the Book of Mormon, again, 2 through 14, and then starting at about 48 to 54, against the Great Isaiah Scroll, the Masoretic text, and the King James Version, noting every single variant with consistent notation. What I did is I used the Great Isaiah Scroll as the earliest version, as basically the baseline. And then when the Masoretic text version or the King James Version had changes, like added words that weren't present in the Great Isaiah Scroll, I had those indicated in italics. And then I compared that version against the 1830 edition Book of Mormon text. What this allowed me to do was align all 3 text verses, or all 3 texts verse by verse, establishing the Great Isaiah Scroll as the baseline, and then tracing whether the Book of Mormon's reading of Isaiah matched the King James Version, the Masoretic text, or the Great Isaiah Scroll version. And that allowed me to verify line by line whether the Book of Mormon reproduced a unique Great Isaiah Scroll variant.
Very good. Well, I'm sure we're all chomping at the bit to see the examples.
Yeah. So this is just showing where I pulled the translations. This is, again, from that same source we talked about, the Israel Museum, Jerusalem. They have a really easy to use Great Isaiah Scroll version that has the comparison of the Masoretic text. So that made it pretty easy for me to pull these versions, even though it did take a little bit of effort to do it all. Because you can't, they're very careful about not letting you copy and paste from their website.
So screen grabs it was?
Screen grabs it was. Hundreds of them,
there.
Actually. So here's our first example. And I've just so people know, in full disclosure, I've monkeyed with the formatting just so that I've got, because on their website, they only have that left and right at the very top of the page. And then the entire 66 chapters follows the same. Yeah, it follows the same pattern. So I just have put that at the top of each of the slides so that people can keep clear. Great Isaiah Scroll is always going to be on the left. Masoretic text version is always going to be on the right.
I see.
So our first variant, and then I'll kind of show how I break it down, you can see is chapter 2, verse 1 of Isaiah. You have the word that Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And you can see that the Masoretic text version has a single change to that, which is they changed the word saw for the word prophesied. I would suggest those are basically synonyms. So I don't know it's a super compelling difference or a super meaningful variant, right? It's more or less the same meaning. But the thing that was interesting about this one is that the Book of Mormon actually does have saw in here. And so this is one example, whereas I started looking at only the Great Isaiah Scroll and the Masoretic text, I said, oh, wow, look at that. Joseph Smith got one right. I think if you'll go to the next slide, then I was disabused of that notion. So this just shows basically how I broke it down. The brackets indicate wording that's unique to the Great Isaiah Scroll that then was changed. So I could have done it in strike through. I just used brackets to indicate that's the way I understand it. So you can see kind of how I break it down below. So it's got the saw for the Great Isaiah Scroll version. It's got prophesied for the Masoretic text version. And then I've got a red arrow for the Book of Mormon's version, which is 2 Nephi 12, verse 2. And you can see that in this instance, the Book of Mormon does follow the Great Isaiah Scroll. But here's the problem. Like we talked about, the King James Version didn't always follow the Masoretic text. For the most part, it did when we're dealing with the Old Testament, but sometimes it used the Septuagint. And so this is an instance where the Book of Mormon followed the King James Version, and the King James Version has the saw from either the Septuagint. So originally I said, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead and finish your thought. I was going to just try and see if I understand. So actually, the King James Version ends up translating it as saw,
Correct.
as opposed to following the Masoretic version, which is prophesied. And it just so happens, completely by coincidence, apparently, that saw is how it is rendered in the Great Isaiah Scroll. So my question is, how did the King James translators know? And is this not proof that the King James Version is truly inspired?
Well, that's why I wrote off to the side sarcastically. How did Joseph know? You can see in those big blue letters. But
So
yeah,
he just followed the King James Version again.
He just followed the King James Version. Yep. But okay. I actually included this, and I want people to know this. I thought when I started putting this together that this actually was the lone example that I had found of where Joseph Smith had basically gotten one right.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, it wasn't really a compelling hit because saw and prophesied are basically synonyms in this context to me. And again, maybe the Hebrew is different. I don't speak Hebrew. I'm just looking at the English translations according to the scholars that I can find.
Different.
Yeah, they must be different because they're translated differently. I agree with you.
Wait a minute.
I just want people... Go ahead.
Are you telling me that he won't get one of them right? Is that what you're telling me?
No.
Okay. Well, that's anticlimactic.
Yeah, and when we
everybody can go home now.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Bill.
Way to let the cat out of the bag, though.
They'll try again later on. Maybe they'll get a few points. We'll see.
There are a few claimed by John Fetness that we'll look at. I think they're laughably absurd to count as hits, but he's not dead, or he's no longer alive to defend himself, is my understanding. Is that right?
No, but this was done by Donald Perry and Ricks.
Yeah, Stephen Ricks. They were just borrowing. They were just borrowing Fetness's work, though, in that piece. Anyways, the point is, I wanted people to know that even when I thought this was a hit for Joseph Smith, it was my first example because I was going to show people.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to show people the methodology using this one example, and then say, okay, well, you've got the one hit, and one that, from context, to me seems more or less just like a synonym. Now let's talk about
trying to be fair, and then you couldn't help yourself.
Well, then I started looking at the King James Version. This is actually why then I added as a third step the King James Version, because I had forgotten that the King James Version doesn't always directly take from the Masoretic text. Yep.
I'm kidding, of course. Of course, I'm kidding. But you're trying to. Of course, you're being fair. But you were trying to show that you were being fair by including a case where Joseph Smith actually somehow managed to follow the Great Isaiah Scroll and not the Masoretic text, all of which was true. The problem is that it's also the same way in the King James Version of the Bible.
Yep. So womp womp. Okay, let's look at our next example, because I think this is the strongest one, the biggest problem for our hypothesis, our falsifiable hypothesis. So we're still in chapter 2 of Isaiah, which is in 2 Nephi chapter 12. You can see over on the left-hand side, we have verse 9 and 10 of Isaiah. Verse 9 reads, "But humanity will be humbled and a mortal brought low." It then ends, and it's very important. I went and looked at the papers from the folks that translated this for the Israel Museum at Jerusalem. This is not a place where the manuscript is cracked or broken in any way. This this first sentence of verse 9 ends with a clear period and then starts right off at verse 11. The Masoretic text has a second sentence added to verse 9. Oh, do not forgive them. And so I've highlighted that in red. And then it has an entire verse that is not included in the Great Isaiah Scroll version. Go deep into the rock, bury yourselves in the ground before the terror of the Lord and his dread majesty. So the second half of verse 9 and all of verse 10 are added to the Masoretic text version. Now, as a simple consequence of the way time works, this means that these were later additions from a scribe. Now, there could be some apologists out there who would say, well, maybe it was based on some earlier oral translation. I'm not dealing in just so stories. That's just an apologetic post hoc invention to solve a problem. What the evidence clearly indicates here is that the back half of verse 9 and all of verse 10 were later creations that were added to Isaiah. They were pseudepigrapha that were added either by scribes or by other people who were trying to make a rhetorical point.
Okay, I don't mean to spoil this like Bill did, but wouldn't it be incredible, hey Bill, wouldn't it be incredible if the Book of Mormon Isaiah actually omitted verse 9b of chapter 2 and all of verse 10? If that same gap were evident in the Book of Mormon Isaiah, that would be Shangri-La for the apologists. That would really be a huge evidence that the Book of Mormon was ancient.
Exactly. This is such an amazing opportunity for the Book of Mormon to provide us actual evidence of its historicity. And instead, that is not what we see. We see the Book of Mormon track exactly with the King James Version, which in this instance tracks with the Masoretic text version. So what that means is that somehow Nephi, if we go back, right, this is why I introduced it with the brass plates in those verses. Mm-hmm. This means somehow Nephi is supposedly recording verses that, as far as we have access to, didn't even exist in that time period. Period. End of story.
I know his Isaiah is at least 500 years earlier than this one. So it should have the same gap. It shouldn't have the stuff that was taken out after the Great Isaiah Scroll was written.
And like you said,
or added in, I'm sorry, not taken out, but added in after it was written.
If Joseph Smith, when he had published the Book of Mormon in 1829, if it had had, or 1830, if it had had, like you said, the second half of verse 9 and all of verse 10 missing, and at the time, because the Great Dead Sea Scrolls weren't discovered until 1947, no one would have understood why those verses were missing. It would have been confusing. What an amazing opportunity for Joseph Smith to vindicate himself and to vindicate the historicity of the Book of Mormon. And we don't get that.
Yes, he said once that time would vindicate him as a prophet. I'm not sure that's going so well.
Yeah, no, it's not. I wanted to add one additional piece of detail on why the experts in this instance think, because they're not just guessing that the Great Isaiah Scroll, or I'm sorry, that the back half of verse 9 and verse 10 are later scribal additions. There's a good reason for it. If you'll go forward one slide. The professors who translated this for the Israel Museum at Jerusalem, Professor Flint and Ulrich, right? Those were the names at the top that we looked at. They note in this paper that I read, so this is just from Wikipedia, but you can go read the sources on Wikipedia, and it's a good way to get information, folks. They argue that those verses, you can see it right here. Abig, Flint, and Ulrich argue that the absence of the second half of verse 9 and all of verse 10 in chapter 2 of 1Q Isaiah A, Great Isaiah Scroll, indicates that these are slightly later additions. The reason they believe that is because there were other versions of Isaiah kept in that same cave. And so they know that the people who were keeping those records had access to another version of Isaiah that also had the back half of verse 9 and verse 10 in there. And so they recognize that keeping both versions recognizes that it was okay for them to be different, that they understood at least a little bit about how these manuscripts, like the dating of these manuscripts, and kept them intentionally.
The Great Isaiah Scroll is dated earliest of the Isaiah Scrolls at Dead Sea, right?
Correct. I think, don't quote me on this, but I think the 1Q Isaiah B is about 300 years after the Great Isaiah Scroll. That's what I remember from looking at all of this. But it is several hundred years later at the very least.
And that's the one that has it as it is in the Masoretic text. So the change had been made sometime, apparently within 300 years or so.
Yep.
Well, it has to happen sometime.
Yep. Sure does. Here's our next example. This is a famous one because it is, a lot of people point to it as a prophecy of Jesus and of Mary. So Isaiah chapter 7, which is recorded at 2nd Nephi chapter 17, says, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Look, the young woman has conceived and is bearing a son, and his name will be Emmanuel." The Masoretic text version also tracks with young woman. However, the King James version, this is where we first get the notion that Mary is a virgin.
Right.
That word could be translated multiple different ways in Hebrew, is my understanding. And so the King James version is
Alma.
relying on.
The word is Alma in Hebrew.
That's right.
Young
and
woman.
so you can see even on an NRSV version, or like a more up-to-date King James version, you can see that they note this. This is what I was talking about.
Yes.
You can see that footnote B says, "or young woman." Now, what does the Book of Mormon do? The Book of Mormon has virgin and tracks exactly with the King James version of Isaiah, which is not justified by the earliest manuscripts.
Right. The virgin is actually from the Septuagint.
Great.
As I understand it. By the way, we've used that word now. We haven't described it. I'm sorry, everybody, but the Septuagint is a Greek version of the Hebrew Bible that was had amongst the Jews. It was, Greek. Everything was Greek. Alexander the Great had conquered the world, and now the world was Hellenized, the known world at least. And so everybody's speaking Greek. Greek was the lingua franca of the day. So, of course, the Jews wanted their scriptures in Greek, and there was a translation committee that did that. And so that is the Septuagint, taken from the number of scholars who were supposed to have been involved in the translation being 70.
And if you want to wonder why the apostles and the gospels think of Mary as a virgin instead of just as a young woman, it's worth considering that they probably, well, according to the gospels, right, they wrote in Greek. And so they probably were referencing the Septuagint instead of the Hebrew here.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, it's all Greek to me. Let me see if I can recapitulate this again. Chapter 7, verses, whatever 14. It is, verse 14, excuse me. Yeah, it's doing the Isaiah, the prophecy that is often misapplied, I believe, to Mary and Jesus. That a young woman will conceive. The Masoretic text, which is Hebrew, has young woman. The King James version has virgin, and the Book of Mormon has virgin. It follows the King James version, not the Great Isaiah Scroll.
Yep. Next is chapter 14. So this is one of those Latin loan words. So Isaiah chapter 14 is in 2nd Nephi 24, and it's talking about a fallen angel. "How are you fallen from heaven, O day star, son of the morning? How have you been cut to the ground, you who laid low the nation?" The Masoretic text version tracks basically, I'll say more or less the same. It has some slight variations in the back half of it.
But same thing, O day star.
Right. It has slight variation at the end. But the real focus here is that the King James version, instead of saying day star, uses the term Lucifer, again, Latin word. And the Book of Mormon has that also. "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" So the problem here is that word, Lucifer, would have meant nothing to the people of Nephi's day. Remember what he talked about, why he was doing this. It was to apply these words to his people and to spread them amongst his people. And you had the verse about, I'm writing down the words of Isaiah, including presumably Lucifer, which he would not have had as a word to write down. They wouldn't have, nor would they have had any context to understand what that means. And this is a change that, again, modern Bibles, NRSV, they don't track with the King James translation because of the Great Isaiah Scroll, indicating that was an incorrect, anachronistic translation from the King James version.
So they say day star. I'm sorry, Bill, go ahead.
No, you're good. Just a reminder, Nephi says he's writing down the words of Isaiah. Hence, it's only when that doesn't work that we come up with the argument that maybe Joseph Smith is writing down his words of Isaiah. But that discounts the fact that Nephi is a real person, allegedly. He's sitting down, he's got the brass plates next to him, and he's copying over the words of Isaiah to the extent that he tells the reading audience, I'm copying down the words of Isaiah. We should find them. We should find the words of Isaiah that aren't in the King James Version because Nephi wrote them down.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Here, let's go to the next one.
This is in the same. This is another really problematic one from the same exact lens. Also in chapter 14, so 2 Nephi 24, we have, I will also make it a possession for the hedgehog, pools of water, and I will sweep it with the broom of destruction, says the Lord of hosts. The Masoretic text version changes that translation from hedgehog to bittern. For folks who don't know what a bittern is, it is a marsh, like a marsh type bird, it looks like a heron, and they're a European bird. So what is a bittern? The word bittern comes from Middle English bitour and from Old French boutour, refers to a large marsh bird, a kind of heron. I've got one featured there, right there on the right-hand side of the slide. The term entered English around the 1300s or 1400s CE. Centuries
Wait a
after,
second. When did this word come into English?
1300s.
So that's after 600 BC.
That is quite a bit after 600 BC.
That's
We're
like
basically
2,000
talking
years after 600 BC.
Mm-hmm. That's a 2,000-year anachronism.
Wow.
So why this happened is because when early English translators, Wycliffe, the Geneva Bible, when they finally then get to the King James Version, when they encountered the Hebrew word here, I'm going to struggle to pronounce it, but kaipod, I don't know how you pronounce Q's in Hebrew, but a creature that they did not recognize, they rendered it bittern, probably because the bird was associated with desolate marshes and made eerie nighttime sounds. So they were trying to give a conceptual translation that would make sense to English readers. So this bittern is a Renaissance era English guess meant to evoke the same type of mood, not a translation of known zoology. And I'll back up again and say, remember what Nephi says. He's recording these words and spreading them amongst his people and likening them to his people. How is that going to work with a term that wouldn't exist for 2,000 years and for a bird that didn't exist in their area? This is a marshy, like a bird that lives in English marshes. How
You
would
should have
this have
changed
made
it to something like jaguar or spider monkey.
Yeah, then it would have been really clear. Turkey.
Yeah. Now, is this what the prior one? This is where you wanted to show that it shows hedgehog in the Great Isaiah scroll.
Yeah. So hedgehog is what it was originally in Hebrew. They didn't know how to translate that, so then they took it over to bittern.
Right. And then the Book of Mormon follows bittern.
Exactly.
If it had come up with hedgehog, that would have been amazing.
Exactly. Another great opportunity for Joseph Smith to prove, or at least give us some solid, actual falsifiable evidence that the Book of Mormon was historical.
So this is one of those instances that you were talking about where the Book of Mormon not only borrows from the King James Version of the Masoretic text, but also errors that crept in and changes that were made by the King James translators. Of course, this is in the Masoretic version as well.
Well, I actually checked that. That's a great catch, because when I was looking at these years, I was sitting there going, hang on, that doesn't make any sense. It's because the version of the Masoretic text that the Israel Museum at Jerusalem has featured on their website is actually a 1980s translation. So they use bittern there for whatever reason. But the original Masoretic text did not use bittern because the word didn't exist in 1000 BC. They might not have.
I had no idea what that was. Maybe at some point I looked it up or knew and I forgot it, but I sort of remember sort of glossing over that and thinking it was something like a cistern.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense because it's talking about water, right? In the context.
That's probably why I did. Mm-hmm. But it's not at all a cistern. It's a freaking bird. It's like a loon.
Mm-hmm. There's a joke here.
We'll let it go.
Oh yeah. Here I just emphasize that, right?
Yes.
That Nephi literally says, I will liken his words unto my people. So how are these ancient Israelites in America going to liken a word that wouldn't exist for thousands of years to themselves? How would this have made any sense in the narrative? This is an internal contradiction in the narrative.
Mm. This is really remarkably bad evidence for the Book of Mormon being historical.
Yep.
But there's more.
Yeah, there are a few more. Isaiah chapter 48, which is captured at 1 Nephi 20, uses this phrase, loins of Judah. The Masoretic text version then gets confused about it and translates it fountain of Judah. You can kind of understand when you just look at those two, how maybe you could translate those similarly, or you could use the same word to communicate both of those ideas. But the
No,
King
what
James
exactly are you
version,
talking about, Kolby? Could you make that clearer for me?
people will need to refer to the hypocephalus and the figure involving Min, the
Men.
Egyptian god. That's right.
Men.
We'll,
M-I-N.
we'll save that for an After Dark
The
episode.
mad, marvelous Madam Min.
That's
Not
right.
men. Min.
The King James version takes it even further than the Masoretic text version. So this is one that's very interesting to me because you can see like the evolution of translation errors stacking on themselves, almost like a telephone game, right? So it starts at loins of Judah, then it becomes fountain of Judah. Then in the King James version, it becomes the waters of Judah. And this is one where this is, to Bill's point earlier, this one is a real problem for the Book of Mormon because Joseph Smith doesn't just strictly follow the King James version here. He says waters of Judah, so following the King James version, and then he adds or out of the waters of baptism. So here we've got him following the King James version, not the Great Isaiah Scroll version. So that already is the problem that we're talking about today. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the other problem, which is Joseph Smith incorporating or out of the waters of baptism, supposedly in 600 BC. This is not a concept that existed in this time in the Hebrew religion. Like the reason that John the Baptist is such a huge deal, such a huge figure, was such a significant prophet, is because he brought that. I don't want to call it an ordinance because I don't believe it's real, but he brought this religious rite of baptism to this religion. It didn't exist in 600 BC, and yet here we see Joseph Smith incorporating this into the Book of Mormon's version of Isaiah, which is equally problematic, like Bill said, because what that means is he's not just following the King James version. He's making a change to the King James version, supposedly restoring these lost, plain and precious things that would have been lost, and yet that isn't vindicated by the Great Isaiah Scroll. It should be, and it isn't.
Yeah, he's leaving the things that were changed. He's not restoring anything. I'm sorry, Bill.
No. I'm sorry. I keep thinking you've stopped, but I wrote it down this way. Joseph Smith's fixes aren't there, and the original when different isn't here. It goes both directions.
Yep. Yeah, this is a huge problem.
The thing that surprises me about this, and that I'm learning something, is that in Isaiah 48:1, in Isaiah, in the Bible, the KJV, waters of Judah, I had thought of as being a location, that these are literal waters. But now I'm looking at the verse in context, and I'm realizing that loins of Judah makes total sense because they're talking about the people that descended from Judah.
Exactly.
These are those by the name. Okay, hear this, house of Jacob, who are called by the name of Israel and have come forth from the loins of Judah. Makes perfect sense. But then the Masoretic version says, you've come forth out of the fountain of Judah. Now they're being poetic in a different way, but they're still trying to get across the same idea, I think, that this is not a literal fountain. This is the source from whence they sprang. Then you get the King James version, who changes that a little bit to the waters of Judah. And then Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon, Isaiah, continues to take it literally. Because it's harder to understand waters of Judah, what it's talking about as a source for these people, as it is fountain of Judah and definitely loins of Judah.
Right.
So he takes it literally and gives it a further literalistic spin. So out of the waters of Judah or out of the waters of baptism. That's what they've come forth from. He's misunderstood that it's talking about descent and not membership in an organization through a ritual called baptism.
Exactly. That's really well said, Arthur.
Thank you.
Isaiah 53. I think this is our last example. So this one actually isn't in Nephi. So I want to make that clear. This is in Mosiah 14. So this is our friend Abinadi, who was so smart that after he went into hiding, his first words out of his mouth while he's in disguise is, "And now I, Abinadi," immediately undoing his disguise. This is an interesting one because Isaiah chapter 53, very significant. A lot of people view it as a messianic prophecy of Jesus, the suffering servant. In verse 11, it says, "Out of the suffering of his soul, he will see the light." That's the Great Isaiah Scroll version, "and find satisfaction." I'll just end there, but it's important to say it includes this phrase, "he will see the light," that isn't present in the Masoretic text version. It just says, "out of his anguish he shall see it." And then the King James version, closer tracks to the Masoretic text version, does not include this reference to light. It just says, "he shall see the travail of his soul and shall be satisfied." And you can see that the Book of Mormon version tracks exactly with the King James version. What this means is that this "he will see the light" phrase is something that this is an actual plain and precious part that was lost, where it's in the Great Isaiah Scroll, is lost in the Masoretic text version, is lost in the King James version, and what do you know? It's lost in the Book of Mormon version too.
Book of Mormon, you had one job.
Yeah, and I have it here at the bottom, but imagine how impressive it would have been, just like we talked about with the missing verses in chapter 2.
Mhm.
Imagine how impressive it would have been if Joseph Smith's version if Joseph Smith had done what he tried to do with the "out of the waters of baptism," the last example we just looked at, but it had actually been right, and it had
Right.
been, "and he shall see the light," that would have been incredibly impressive. Like, I wouldn't deny that that's significant evidence of historicity, because that would be very compelling. But we don't get that. In fact, we get the exact opposite.
Did you have something you want to say about that, Bill?
No, I'm just over here laughing because you've once again, Kolby, proved you've shown one more way in which the Book of Mormon. You should, again, we've been saying this all along. You should expect some things in both directions. You should expect Joseph Smith to translate Nephi's writings and there to be some things that are in the ancient Isaiah text that are not in the KJV. And we should expect some of the things that are in the old Isaiah text to show up the other direction. But we don't see any. We see none. We don't see anything from Isaiah that's different from the KJV version showing up in the Book of Mormon. And we see none of Joseph Smith's fixes anywhere where he claims he's correcting scripture and fixing what was showing up in that old stuff. Statistically, without having either going any direction, it would be statistically absurd for the Book of Mormon to be what it claims to be. You have to have at least some. It's rational, logical to have some. You have none. It's so bad.
It's a real problem.
I wish there was at least an NHM laying around so we could at least have something to cling to.
You'll have something. There will be something that the apologist will ride to the rescue here in just a few minutes.
I will get my hat and get it ready to hang on it.
Make sure it's made of tinfoil.
It will help, I promise. Okay, what's our next slide, RFM? I think it might actually be that piece from Fitness. That's what I thought. Okay, well, au contraire, Bill Real, because there are several examples that John Fitness is going to tell you where there is alignment with the Great Isaiah Scroll. There are 5 whole alignments with the Great Isaiah Scroll. So pay no attention to the fact that the Book of Mormon includes missing verses. When you could look at this piece from, I think this was in the Interpreter in 2011, where Don Perry and Stephen Ricks include research done by John Fitness earlier.
Journal of Book of Mormon Studies, but not that important.
Journal of Book of Mormon Studies, that's right, a different rag. Example number 1, where the Great Isaiah Scroll does vindicate Joseph Smith. Bill Real, is it impressive to you to know that there were several places that Joseph Smith included ands that were also consistent with what's in the Great Isaiah Scroll version. Checkmate, Bill Real.
All right, let's keep going. I don't think that really means much for me, but go ahead.
Yeah,
You're not
this is
sounding
why
as desperate as you sounded a second ago.
this is why I said there are no substantive, because I think all of these are a joke. Number two, what if there was a plural verb that's using a singular noun, Bill Real? Does that impress you?
So he added an S where there should have been an S.
Actually,
All
where there shouldn't be an S. That's even worse. But
I don't know. That's how I speak as a matter of course.
yeah. How about example number 3, Bill Real, where he changes I to my?
Ooh, that's better than and. I think you're at least moving up. It's incrementally, but you're at least escalating the evidence. So I like it.
Any one of these taken separately may not be impressive, but all of them together will blow your socks off.
That's right. And it came to pass. Example number 5, and then we'll deal with number 4, because this one's really funny to me. Number 5 uses a plural noun that was required by the context, but there was a plural noun.
In other words, it was logical to make it a plural noun where there wasn't. Joseph Smith logically makes it a plural noun, and so did the original Isaiah logically make it a plural noun. It's only the KJV and wherever it got its info from that decided to work illogically.
Yeah. Okay. And so the real simple example for all of these 4, while we've been jokey about it, is remember that the Book of Mormon is an orally dictated text. So the addition of additional ands, changing plurals, to me, those are completely meaningless. Number 4, the example that's included in number 4 is actually really funny because it uses the wrong translation of the Great Isaiah Scroll. So the Book of Mormon has a phrase from Isaiah 50, verse 2, where the Book of Mormon says, I make their rivers a wilderness and their fish to stink because their waters are dried up. But the King James Version says, I make their rivers a wilderness, their fish stinketh because there is no water, which apparently these apologists think is like compellingly different. Water's dried up.
If there's no water, it's because it was dried up. It's kind of saying a similar thing in different words to me.
100%. I agree with you. Now, the Great Isaiah Scroll version, the one I pulled that we've looked at all night, says their fish stink for lack of water and die of thirst. However, in this piece, Don Perry and Stephen Ricks, again, building on Fetness's work, quote incorrectly, say the Great Isaiah Scroll reads, their fish dry up because there is no water, but that isn't actually what it's translated as, at least on the version that I was looking at. However, the other problem for this particular example, and this I am borrowing from Colby Townsend. I actually came to the same conclusion and then went back and looked at his piece. But Adam Clark actually includes in his biblical commentary on Isaiah chapter 50, verse 2, their fish stinketh, and then has an alternative translation, their fish is dried up. And he's pointing to the fact that translation is also supported by the Septuagint. So even if they had correctly quoted the Great Isaiah Scroll, which they didn't,
who cares?
The hit is a nothing burger. And that's my point. So if people are going to listen to this and say, wait a second, there were 5 hits, there are 5 hits that I feel very comfortable calling absolutely non-substantive hits.
Is it fair to say that number 4 is more knowing all the context of other things? It's actually another evidence that Joseph plagiarized from Adam Clark.
Yes. And Colby Townsend used it for that purpose.
Yeah.
Well, it's a pity that they feel the need to misquote the Great Isaiah Scroll in order to make such a crappy point as this is.
Yeah. If you're going to misrepresent the evidence, at least make a better point with it.
If you're going to sell your integrity up the river, make it worth it, guys.
It's also interesting, too. Stinketh isn't in the oldest documents, correct?
Stinketh wasn't it?
Go back one.
I thought it was in everything.
It is. It is. That's the hilarious thing.
That's why it's a nothing burger.
That's why it's a nothing burger. They're calling it a win because they thought that stinketh wasn't in the earlier one. They quoted as saying, the Great Isaiah Scroll reads, their fish dry up because there is no water. It doesn't read that. It says, their fish stink for lack of water. So it has the stink.
I just want to note, there is a place in the Book of Mormon where, if you remember that the queen's husband dies and they think
Lamoni's father. Yep.
But I think he stinketh not.
Yes.
Is that an evidence of ancient ancient literary usage.
It's evidence of something, and it stinketh.
Yes, absolutely. So here we got I think that apologetic argument really doesn't smell good, Colby.
Yeah.
So this is what it looks like, by the way. I want to give everybody a visual on this. And I made a few comments here on the side as I was making the slide. If this discovery were authentic, okay, really, Mormon apologists would have been shouting it from the rooftops for decades. Instead, all we have is a paper written by John Twetness in 1981 on which this 2000 article is based. And then the 2000 article was then republished in 2011 in the Journal of Book of Mormon Studies. The article is only 2 pages long. This is how committed they are to this particular argument. And there's the 2 pages. In between, they've got a huge picture of a cave, right? To make it kind of look longer. But look at all the fluff here. I'm going to put us down here at the bottom, but over here, okay, they've got this huge title. They've got the authors, the subtitle, the heading. Finally, you get started on that. You got a big picture of Donald Perry looking at that great Isaiah scroll like he's never going to get another chance. And down here, you've got the bios and the pictures of the authors, Don Perry and Stephen Ricks. And I'm just going, my gosh, you have done everything you could to make this article look as big as you possibly could. And it's only 2 pages, even with all the fluff that you put in there. Oh, and down there from the editor, a huge box at the bottom. See that? Look at the writing that is the actual article, and you'll see how short it is. That's it for their 5 examples. They have no confidence that this is anything noteworthy about the Book of Mormon. Otherwise, like I said, it would be treated entirely differently. I am personally familiar, and I'll explain it somehow. I was involved in submitting something to farms and them going, I'm not sure this, is that great. And I said, I know it's not, a smoking gun, but it's an interesting little piece of evidence toward a certain theory. And then they published it in their Insights magazine without telling me in advance. So it was quite a surprise to me when I saw it, when I got my little subscription in the mail to the Insights newsletter. But I'm just saying that because I know that they will publish stuff that everybody's going, this is crap. But it's a slow news day.
You can almost see that as far as our hypothesis goes in this editor's note. So I'm glad you included this, because the point that they're trying to make is in this bottom sentence. They say, contrary to the gainsayers of the Book of Mormon, who claim that Joseph Smith simply copied from the King James Bible, the Book of Mormon version of Isaiah belongs to a different textual family than the Masoretic text of Isaiah behind the King James Version. So Tvetness's work, the reason I didn't dig into and I did read it, but the reason we didn't go in detail on Tvetness's 1981 paper is because he's making an entirely different argument. He's looking at a lot of different manuscripts. And even when he looks at all of those manuscripts, he finds basically it's something like 234 variants between the King James Version and the Book of Mormon. And then he's looking to other manuscripts beyond the Great Isaiah Scroll in most instances to say, well, look, this, Joseph Smith has vindicated by this other manuscript or this other manuscript. The ones that are compelling for the Great Isaiah Scroll itself that are directly topical tonight are right here in these 2 pages. And we talked about every single one of them.
And the other thing that's really disappointing about these 2 scholars is that I would think that if they have gone through this to the detail that they would need to in order to come up with these 5 paltry examples, that they would have seen the other examples that run the other way.
Exactly. Some of them are in the same chapter.
Yeah, which you have talked about and which are, to my mind, conclusive on the issue. They know those, or the lion's share of those, but they are keeping their readers in the dark about them when they write apologetic articles like this.
That is the truth.
Do you think that's a moral thing to do, Bill?
I think all of Mormon apologetics is dishonest and deceptive. I think it's all intended to circumvent logical thinking. It's all meant to create a space where faith can be permitted, but where faith isn't rational, but we can't tell the person that the apologetic reasoning is the least, or at least less than the most rational answer.
And to go back to the disclaimer I had at the beginning, I wish that
beginning of the
No,
entire?
I'm sorry. No, you don't have to go back to it. I just want to return to the
Oh,
thought,
okay.
which is I just wish the apologists would be honest about the fact that they're accepting these things as faith propositions or
Yeah.
as meaningful or valuable instead of doing this bullshit where they sell it as actually evidenced because it's not. The evidence indicates that the Book of Mormon is not a historical document, like a historical document as it purports to be, period, end of story. And that does not mean that people have to give it up. Okay. The Book of Mormon has been very meaningful to me at points in my life. There's still phrases of it that run through my head. There's still parts and lessons that I learned about it that I think are incredibly important to who I became. But that doesn't make it historical. That's historicity is a very specific question. And the reality is that the Book of Mormon is not historical.
Yeah,
Evidence
something
like
can
this
be.
indicates it can't be.
I
I'm
was gonna say
sorry.
something can be historical and not inspirational at all. In fact, probably the majority of historical stuff is not inspirational.
Uh,
Yeah. My wife and I were watching a documentary, like just a little short Nat Geo documentary on YouTube the other night. And it was 6 artifacts, like 6 recent archaeological discoveries that have changed the way we understand certain things about history. And the first writing that they had found was something that it was literally like a bill of goods. Oh, it was a
In
diary.
cuneiform?
It wasn't in cuneiform. It was a diary that was involved in building the Great Pyramid of Giza. And it was someone tracking shipments of stone in and out, in and out. Because guess what? The work of building an empire takes logistics. And that's what they were doing. So, to your point of most historical things probably aren't meaningful, yeah, that's exactly true. Like it takes effort to build that. I actually have a version that I wanted to return to at the end of the timeline, if that's what we wanted to talk about.
I did want to show something. Just
Sure.
in the very beginning of the show, when we started, my head was down a bunch, and you probably, maybe at least somebody in the audience was wondering what I was doing. I went on to LDS Bot, and I wanted to ask it, I wanted to sort of walk it into this argument and see what would happen. And so I just, I start off by saying, you're aware that some early Isaiah portion of the Old Testament was found with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yep. It goes on, tells me the data. I say, perfect. When we look at that, would it be accurate to describe it as more different than the Book of Mormon's use of Isaiah? It goes on to say, yes, it has variations, blah, blah, blah. I said, would it be more rational to see the Book of Mormon as almost assuredly not a restoring of Isaiah, but rather that the way the Book of Mormon's Isaiah is different from the Great Isaiah Scroll point to the Book of Mormon being a modern day fabrication? And it says it's understandable to have questions, but you have to take into consideration translation process. And it doesn't answer my question, right? Again, Mormon apologists have created LDS Bot, and it plays by the same rules that they do. But the three of us, we're smarter than this. So it tells me I have to keep in mind translation process, doctrinal insights, faith perspective. And it goes, it's important to approach these questions with an open mind and heart, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I'm asking for the most reasonable, rational, logical perspective. And it again goes into, it's important to consider several factors: historical context, textual variation, faith and scholarship, scholarly divide. I said, great.
You have to consider all of these factors that have nothing to do with the question or the answer.
This gets better. I say, great. I say, but after considering those several factors, I still need the most rational, logical perspective. It says, from a purely rational and logical perspective, without considering faith-based beliefs, one might conclude that the differences between the Book of Mormon's Isaiah passages and the Great Isaiah Scroll point to a 19th century origin. I say, you say, and that whole thing, I say, as if several responses beside it are of it being a 19th century origin are just as rational. But can you give me simply the most rational, logical answer without obfuscating? It says, from a strictly rational and logical standpoint, focusing solely on textual and historical evidence, one might conclude, again, it says might. So I put logically would conclude rather than might. It then corrects itself. From a logical and secular perspective, many might conclude. But, many is still, see, it's wiggle room, because many doesn't even mean the majority. It just means a bunch of people in a large room of people.
I'm still trying to get over the fact that you're having a conversation with a freaking computer and it's trying to talk to you in a way that is other than logical and secular.
Now, by the way, I did this with ChatGPT after this, and it's so simple and cut and dry, and I'll show you that in a second. So it does the whole thing. It does many might. And I said, is it in your programming to grant critical responses of Mormonism with as little benefit to their argument as possible? And it goes, I aim to provide faithful Latter-day Saint perspectives while addressing questions, blah, blah, blah. I said, right. Even if said responses are illogical or irrational. And it said, please have a nice day. It ended the conversation.
You pulled a Captain Kirk on Nomad. You totally blew its wiring. They probably had a 4-alarm fire wherever this thing's located.
So then I went into ChatGPT, and I was asking other things too, such as like the Latin language when we got to that.
Yeah.
But I said, it just answers my question directly. Why the comparison? That's the Jordan one. No, that's not what I'm looking for. Isaiah, here it is. Is it possible for Isaiah the Bible to have no, that's not it. Let me just check really quick. Dead Sea Scrolls, maybe it's this. And if it's not, then I'll move on.
Do you ask AI questions about me, Bill?
I do.
Do you? I don't see it here. Anyway, I asked ChatGPT the same question, and it just immediately said, the most logical, rational answer is that the Book of Mormon is a 19th century production because the changes that are in it are not found in the earliest texts of it. It just answers the question. And so it's amazing to recognize, for all you believers who might be, again, very few do, but for whatever believers are out there, just notice that everything, LDS bot, apologists, church curriculum, church periodicals, LDS leaders, they're all circumventing rational thinking. Why is that? I don't know. Anyway.
And why is it that at every place, and there aren't that many, but they are somewhat known, and this is a new one, at least new to me, that Kolby discovered and researched. Why is it that at every place where circumstances are such that the Book of Mormon has a chance to be proven true, or the Book of Abraham with the facsimiles, and after that, of course, the actual papyrus. But why is it that the Book of Mormon, Book of Abraham, all these productions of Joseph Smith, why is it that every chance they have a chance to be proven true, they fail? There's not one instance of which I'm aware that they succeed. I mean, you could say, oh, there's these 5 things. That's not what success looks like to me.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think it's a great point Kolby made. Success on this issue shows at least as many substantial hits as substantial misses. And Kolby showed that there were lots of substantial misses, and then there's these 5 meaningless hits. Mormonism is always letting us down. It's always a disappointment when it comes to proving the church true.
Yeah, and I like everything you said there, both Bill and RFM. And for folks that don't understand, the reason that I do programs like this with you guys or with John is because of exactly what Bill said. Because these apologists and the church authorities have tricked people into accepting bad reasons to continue believing in this stuff. And if people want to believe this because it's meaningful to them, or it's their community, or it's their heritage, or they believe it based on faith, that's fine. But that needs to fly under the true colors. And we need to have these apologists stop pretending that there are good, evidence-based reasons to believe this, because like we've shown on a number of different things, every time we would get an actual chance to get a falsifiable test a hypothesis of, is the Book of Mormon historical? It fails. Every time we get that with Joseph Smith and the Book of Abraham materials, as long as you look closely, it fails every time. And if people, like I said, if people want to believe that based on faith, that's their prerogative. But the reason that I continue to do programs like this is not because I hate the church. It's because I want people to understand that logical thinking, that critical thinking, if you're going to accept these explanations and these bad arguments for Mormonism, you're engaged in special pleading unless you're willing to accept them for other faith systems. Because here's the reality. I'll do my slight little diatribe about faith for a second. which is faith, which is really just the belief in things without evidence. It literally says that in Hebrews, could be used as a grounding for belief in any system, period. You could accept racism on the basis of I have faith. And the fact that it can be used as an argument to support any worldview is clear evidence to me that it should be used as evidence to support no worldviews. Otherwise, we're just engaged in special pleading.
Wood tool.
Wood tool.
Yeah. Great job, Kolby.
Thank you. I think I had one more go through the timeline.
Oh, yes.
Just to really drive this home.
I'm so sorry. That was
You're fine.
doing it.
No, I love the
Give me a
discussion.
second here. I'll skip ahead sort of towards we're past this, correct?
Yep.
Oh, I thought this was the one at the end. Because I know you have it again at
go
the
back
end.
a few more, Bill. One more, maybe. Okay, we talked about this. This is, again, just to remind people, here's why this matters. We can't do loose conceptual translation, and we definitely can't do it with Nephi. If you'll go forward one more slide, Bill. Because remember, according to the Book of Mormon's own narrative, there's a difference between what comes after 1st and 2nd Nephi than there is what's in 1st and 2nd Nephi. In Words of Mormon, when Joseph Smith loses the lost 116 pages, this is a real defeater for this idea that, well, maybe the explanation is it's a conceptual translation, because in Words of Mormon, it literally says, and now I speak somewhat concerning that which I have written. For after I had made an abridgment from the plates of Nephi down to the reign of this King Benjamin, of whom Amaleki spake, I searched among the records which had been delivered into my hands, and I found these plates being those small plates of Nephi, which contained this small account of the prophets from Jacob down to the reign of this King Benjamin, and also many of the words of Nephi. And behold, I shall take these plates, these being the plates of Nephi, which contain these prophecies, prophesyings, and revelations, and put them with the remainder of my record, for they are choice unto me, and I know they will be choice unto my brethren. What Mormon is saying here is he literally took those plate pages that Nephi copied, where Nephi copied it from the brass plates, and put it right into the Book of Mormon record that landed on Joseph Smith's backyard. And that, I think, is really clear that this has to be a tight literal translation from the brass plates to Nephi, then just handed right over to Mormon, then to Joseph Smith.
Wow, great idea. Great concept. Great insight. Because the vast majority of the Isaiah chapters in the Book of Mormon are in 1st and 2nd Nephi.
Correct. And then I wanted to just go over the timeline one more time, just to really drive the point home. And now that we've given the examples, I think it helps people understand. I think it's on the next slide. So we've gone through this. What I added here are these yellow and green arrows to say what we should see if the Book of Mormon were historical is we should see the yellow arrow. We should see the Book of Mormon capturing through the brass plates this Great Isaiah Scroll version, or at least a version that's closer to the Great Isaiah Scroll. That's not what we see. Instead, we see that the Book of Mormon tracks with the King James Version from 1611 or from the Masoretic text version from 1009 AD. It's really as simple as that. As a matter of time, we don't see the evidence that we would expect to see if the Book of Mormon were historical.
It seems very much a product of its time, and this chart illustrates that nicely.
Yeah, I thought a timeline for this one was helpful.
Anything you want to say about this, Bill? How about the way you're rendered here by Kolby?
I think those are great glasses. I think it's a sharp looking shirt. I think I got the best shirt of the three of us for starters.
How dare you?
And you know, yeah, I think we all three look.
Kolby's very into his flannel, living in Idaho and all that.
I think hands like that make it easy to grab a coffee cup.
Oh yes, very much so. As well as that, do other things.
Yeah, we do have somebody down below. I'm not sure if we're ready for that now, but I did just send the link out. So
I'm ready. I have
we got
nothing
the
else
link
to
out there.
add.
Come join the studio if you like. We're not doing phone calls, but we'll take
Chuck.
3 people who stream in. There's Chuck. Chuck, how you doing?
Did you use your Lego hand to grab that?
I used the only hand I got. Does it look Lego?
Yeah, no.
I see another hand there.
Hey, great episode, Kolby. This is something that's very interesting to me. You've done some great work here. I've poured through it, looking at the Hebrew and trying to do some various things, and found a couple that you had, but you had some new ones there that I had missed too. So great work.
Thanks.
I think the Great Isaiah Scroll is just a phenomenal find, and to have it all together like that is just fantastic. There's also an obsession that Joseph and the early 19th century folks had about Isaiah.
Mm-hmm.
If you look in Clark, for example, there's I forget where it's at, but it's at the end of the essay about Isaiah by Clark. He's summarizing someone's work, and it's over and over and over. It's broken into 5 or 6 sections, and it talks about how these chapters, 40 to 49, are talking about the Messiah and how he's going to redeem the Jews and all of this kind of thing. They were heavily obsessed with it, but we also see it in one other place that most people don't realize is there, which is D&C 113.
Mm.
That section is specifically for answering questions about Isaiah, chapters 11 and 52.
Right.
And if you look at your chart of all those that you mapped out, there's a huge chunk of them that are coming out of Isaiah 52. They are just obsessed with it.
I'm going to have to look at that under that lens. I
forgot
forgot about
Jesse
that.
and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, check it out. You have, when you put your comparisons up there, there's just, probably a dozen or no, more like 2 dozen probably there.
Okay.
I would think, now that I've got this insight from Kolby, that the stem of Jesse would be similar to the loins of Jesse,
You're probably right.
or the fountain, or the stem.
More of a tree trunk probably in Joseph's case. But one other thing that I think is interesting about the Great Isaiah Scroll is not only does it provide great contextuality like you've done here and comparison work available through it, there's physical evidence too of Deutero-Isaiah there in the Great Isaiah Scroll. If you've never looked into this, for 2 centuries now, they've been hypothesizing that somewhere between chapter 32 or 33 and chapter 40, I believe. No, 39.
I think it's 40. Yeah.
There's a delineation into Deutero-Isaiah.
Yeah, 40 begins Deutero-Isaiah, typically. Yeah.
Yep. If you look at the Great Isaiah Scroll, after chapter 33, there's a gap. And then there's a new skin tied on or sewn in, and then a new chapter starts. That gap only ever indicates one thing, according to some scholars, including my Hebrew professor. That's a new book that's coming next. They don't waste that kind of space if it's just a continuation. So you have that, but then there's also other signals, like there's more evidence. The first section looks like it's been compressed. There's evidence that it sat flat and compressed. There's lines, on the edges of the scroll that were flattened out. And then the second part doesn't have that. So they were stitched together as separate books. They were treated as separate books.
Yeah, I would observe that some modern translations, like the NRSV, does a similar kind of thing with the long ending of Mark, which is they separate it a bit from the others and put a little line in between it to designate visually that it's separate from it. And then you got to look at the footnotes to find out why.
Yep. And that skin's at a premium, back then. Yeah. They're not going to waste any of that then. So there's that evidence of it, but then there's also, when they found 21 versions of Isaiah scrolls, and 19% have 1 and 2 Isaiah together. I wrote some numbers down here. 43% are first Isaiah only, and 38% are second Isaiah only. So they're stored separately, and only 4 of them have ever been brought together from the Qumran caves. So,
have you mentioned this to Abraham Gileadi?
No, I've seen him popping up a lot lately. He's got a conference or something happening.
I don't know. Was that someone knocking at my door?
I think that was someone beating on the wall saying I'm too loud.
It wasn't on my.
I hope it was at your house, because otherwise I'm freaking out, man, because I'm here alone and the building's dark.
I'm sorry that picks up. But anyways, yeah, the Great Isaiah Scroll is fantastic for many, many reasons.
Yeah, definitely. And Abraham Gileadi, of course, being a guy whose entire research on the book of Isaiah, which is all he's done since forever, is predicated upon the idea is that it's all one, that there is no second or third Isaiah. At least that's my understanding, right? Because he's got to take that tack because the Book of Mormon presents as they're all one. If they're actually separate and written when the scholars think they were, then the Book of Mormon has no business quoting from 2nd Isaiah because it didn't exist yet when the Book of Mormon says it was written, much less 3rd Isaiah. So that's a huge problem. So Abraham Gileadi has run into the battle on his white charger saying, no, it is all one book and I can prove it. Watch me. And that is, I think, one of the reasons he's become so popular. He was popular back in 1993. I think he was doing a lot of last days kinds of things that got him sideways with the church. He got excommunicated with the September 6th.
Yeah, and just to note, I'm aware of in Cedar City here, for instance, just a couple of years ago, someone notifying me that their husband was in a private scripture study group that they were uber focused on Abraham Gileadi, and that was what was going on back in the day too. He was getting a lot more following and like loyalty to him than over the brethren versus lots of members. So lots of members were choosing him and his teaching, his thoughts over what the brethren had to say, and he sort of disappeared, and we hadn't heard about him for a long time. He's resurfaced, of course, as you point out, but these groups in the shadows have never gone away. They've been around ever since.
Like a phoenix rising from the ashes. And yet, Chuck, like you say, this has been a theory for a long time about 2nd Isaiah, but now it sounds like there's physical evidence to confirm it.
Yeah, there's good physical evidence. It happens after chapter 33.
I'll look forward to Abraham's cruise circuit coming up soon, I'm sure. Like most of the Mormon apologists that do the cruise circuit now. Apparently.
Hey, let's not diss on it too much because we're thinking about doing a cruise, Mr. Kolby.
Okay, well, I'm coming.
Because we would actually have a swing in time. Chuck, was there anything else you wanted to say?
No, I'm just going to leave it with picturing you guys in swimsuits, and I'm going to sign off.
Chuck mine's flannel, just FYI.
I go to sleep imagining Kolby in a flannel Speedo.
Great. I'm out.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Good decision, Chuck.
On that note, Chuck will leave.
I don't see anybody.
Nothing to do. Come on the show. You know you want to. All right. That's about all we have. Bill, do you want to say anything in closing? Would you like to say hi to Professor Jackson?
I just know that there was a time not too long ago where the apologists felt confident and they engaged all over the place.
That was me.
All over the place. They engaged everywhere. They were over here and over there. In today's world, I hardly ever see an apologist debating anything in any space with critics of the church.
I had to shame the three amigos into debating me publicly. That took an act of God.
And they showed up
to it.
And they showed up in bulletproof vest.
Yes, they did.
They did.
They did. Promptly. Unfortunately, they didn't put their bulletproof vests over their asses, which promptly got kicked all over that stage.
Goodness.
I know, I was there. So anyway, everybody. So I'm going to close the show. Okay. You want to talk about anything else, guys? Okay.
I don't think so. Oh, can I say one thing since I shouted out this show when I was on what is it? Mormon Stories.
Hey, wait a second. Kolby, look down. What does that say?
Yeah,
A Reddish says, "Hey son, thanks guys."
That's my mother.
Is that your dad? It's not your dad. It's your mom.
That's my mom. Mm-hmm.
That's nice. Yep. I'm sorry, I said your dad, and then I remembered, of course, it's not your dad.
Yeah, that's okay.
That's sweet. Is there anything you'd like to say to your mom who's watching right now, Kolby?
No, thanks, Mom. Thanks for the support.
Yeah. I don't want to tell her the money doesn't go to you. It actually goes to us.
Yeah, that's okay.
You think she knows
for a
that?
while, she knows that this is my form of Exmo tithing, helping out people who are just like me. Or just like I was during my faith crisis. Gosh, what did I want to say?
Something that's about your mom.
You were talking about being on Mormon Stories earlier, and you wanted to say something.
Yes. For people who are interested in historicity, Book of Mormon historicity arguments, I did a part of the LDS discussion series on Mormon Stories earlier today, dealing with the issue of Nahum. RFM and I have covered that in greater detail in the Light and Truth Letter series, but this is kind of just like a canned, just dealing with Nahum and dealing with the issue of, is it really in the right place like so many apologists
Mhm.
claim? Is it really a burial site? Looking at, it's amazing when you spend some time learning, even just like bare minimum time, learning actual history, how quickly the apologetics just fall apart like those Thanos snap dust images I generated earlier.
I am Iron Man.
Rando. Thanks for having me, gentlemen. I really appreciate you and all you do in this space.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you too, Kolby. And this is a great insight, great research. I think this is really important. I'm glad that we got to premiere it here on this show with you as a guest. And for those of you who can't get enough of Kolby, we're going to be recording this weekend, aren't we? You and me?
I am out of town right now, so probably not.
Because we had planned it, and then all of a sudden I was going to announce it, and then I thought, wait a second, maybe something's happened, and he's going to be out of town this weekend. So you're not going to be in town. You're not going to be able to record with me. Is that what you're saying? You're going to break your promise?
I could probably do Saturday.
Okay. But it's on the polygamy chapter in the Light on Truth letter. We have sworn blood oaths. We're going to get done with this book, the review of this book by the end of the year, and that time's ticking.
You guys keep picking that thing off the ground, standing it back on its feet, and then just knocking it down again. It's almost cruel and unusual punishment at this point.
Well, Kolby keeps saying, stay down. But Austin, he keeps getting back up.
He just had AI write that. He just wanted to make a few dollars on writing a book.
It's a big stinker.
It stinketh.
I did a presentation at Thrive in Boise like about a month ago, and I texted RFM this when I was doing that. That's probably the series people most like know me because it's the longest we've done. RFM, that series that RFM I have done is like over 50 hours of content on the Light and Truth letter. Like we spent more time. If you look at the interviews that Austin's done versus the ones that we've done on the Light and Truth letter, it's insane to me that the Light and Truth letter is most known from the series picking it apart and burying it in the ground.
If you Google it, our stuff's probably going to come up first. I don't know. Maybe his letter will come up, but not his interviews.
No.
Everybody, hopefully you're still interested in this. This will be about polygamy. We're going to be not everything about polygamy. I mean, how could you say that in less than a lifetime? I don't know. But we're going to be responding to the arguments that Austin makes in his Light on Truth letter about why Joseph Smith practicing polygamy really wasn't as bad a thing as it looks like. I haven't even read the chapter yet, and I think I've summarized it pretty well. What do you think, Kolby? Is that pretty much what it is?
That's probably right. We can also predict to relatively high certainty that it's going to use the same exact logical fallacies and manipulation tactics that he decries in the first chapter.
Yes, and warned you about the anti-Mormons using before he uses the very same in order to inveigle you, if I use that term correctly. Okay, everybody. Also, in addition to that, which is going to be great, don't forget Mormonism After Dark this Friday night, 8:00 p.m. Mountain Time. Come along and join the party. It's the best time on the internet on Friday night, at least. So we have a lot of fun, and hopefully you'll join us and you will too. So we'll see you later at one of the shows that we're doing all the time. Thanks for watching. Have a great night, and we'll see you next time on Mormonism Live.